Hey everyone, tonight we are going to Death Valley, the literal hottest place on earth. Imagine waking up before sunrise and still feeling like you're wrapped in a hairdryer on volcano mode. That's where we're headed. No fantasy, no special effects, just me, a camera, a fried egg sizzling on a rock, and the kind of heat that melts your optimism before lunch. Now, don't get me wrong, I've done some questionable things for YouTube before, but this trip I might have actually overcooked my common sense. You probably won't survive a day here unless you know what you're doing. Luckily, ID items single quotes. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Also, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from and what's the temperature there right now? I want to compare it to the surface of the sun, just for laughs. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. I stepped off the tiny rattling plane in Furnace Creek, California. Just as the sun started to creep over the hills, it was about 5:45 a.m. You'd think early morning in the desert would be peaceful, even a little cool, right? Wrong. It felt like someone had left the oven on all night and forgot to take out the sand. As I walked across the tarmac, my boots actually softened. I could feel them giving way under the heat of the asphalt. I half expected to leave a footprint behind, like I was stepping into lava frosting. A quick glance at my phone. 98 degrees Fahrenheit already, and sunrise had barely started. The air smelled like hot gravel and dry metal, like a tire shop on fire. I was staying in one of the few places that actually let you camp in this madness, a small trailer in the Furnace Creek campground, equipped with a fan, a sink, and what I was optimistically calling air conditioning, which sounded suspiciously like an old man wheezing into a tube. I dumped my gear, stepped outside, and immediately regretted it. The light from the sun had barely hit full strength, but already I felt like I was standing under a heat lamp, in a microwave, wrapped in tinfoil. There was no breeze, just still, shimmering air and this bizarre hum in the distant cicadas, I assumed, yelling angrily about the climate like tiny insect protesters. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt sharp, like the heat had edges. It didn't just warm you, it stabbed at you. Every inhale left my throat feeling more like sandpaper. One of the park rangers had warned me the day before, "You've never felt heat like this. It doesn't care who you are, it just takes friendly guys." Looked like he hadn't blinked in a decade. By 6:30 a.m. I'd convinced myself to enjoy the morning with a walk to the nearby visitors center. That journey, about 0.7 miles, felt like a full expedition. The sun had officially broken the horizon, and suddenly the shadows were gone. Just gone. Everything was flooded in this blazing golden white floodlight that bleached the colors from the desert. Even the cacti looked like they were holding their arms up in surrender. You know that scene in old movies where someone walks into a steam room and instantly starts sweating? That was me, except the steam was invisible and the sweating was aggressive. My shirt, proudly boasting a Survivor Death Valley logo, had turned dark and sticky. Spoiler, I was not surviving anything. On the way, I passed a group of German tourists, bless them, 2 of whom were wrapped in scarves, like they were on a trip to the Arctic. I guess the sun hits different when you're used to Berlin clouds. They were marveling at how beautiful everything looked. And yeah, in a way, they were right. It was beautiful, stark, alien, otherworldly, like Mars, but with less chance of Elon Musk showing up. I reached the visitor center just as the digital thermometer clicked over to 106 degrees Fahrenheit at 7 a.m. The record for this place, 134 degrees Fahrenheit, set in 1913, though some argue it was exaggerated due to old, imprecise measuring techniques. Still, modern Death Valley has legit broken 130 degrees Fahrenheit, most recently in 2020. In fact, some scientists think it may actually be getting hotter, thanks to, you guessed it, climate change. The debate still smolders on. I went inside to cool off only to realize the center doesn't use traditional AC. It's cooled by swamp coolers, which work great unless the air is too dry. Spoiler again, Death Valley is basically the poster child for low humidity. One ranger offered me a chilled bottle of water. I reached out, missed the bottle completely, and smacked my hand on the counter. Heat does weird things to your depth perception. Your brain just cooks, and then laughs about it. Outside again, I heard a kid ask his dad if he could fry an egg on the sidewalk. The dad answered, "Probably, but we're not wasting a good egg. Later, I found a video online of someone frying bacon on the hood of their car here. 5 minutes, crispy, add toast, and you've got a full breakfast, just no plate. Unless you want to hold your food with oven mitts. That's when I realized, if I was going to make it through this day without becoming a rotisserie host, I had to pace myself, rest, hydrate, stay shaded, and maybe, just maybe, not act like a documentary filmmaker in a disaster movie. But did I do any of those things? Nah. By the time I shuffled back to my trailer, the air had turned from uncomfortably hot to convection oven meets hairdryer. It was only 8 a.m. and the digital thermometer now read 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I pulled open the trailer door and was hit by a wave of stale warmth, like I'd left a pizza in the car overnight. Inside wasn't any better. It was like the fan was politely whispering, "Good luck, buddy." Still determined to start the day with some sort of ritual, I set out to make coffee. After all, I'm a civilized desert wanderer, right? I unpacked my little pour-over setup, a bag of ground beans, and a water bottle that had already turned lukewarm. I figured, hey, if I boil the water now, maybe I'll still get something close to hot coffee. Double quotes, except ... I didn't have to boil anything. I just set the metal kettle outside in a sunbeam and waited. Less than 10 minutes later, the water was actually steaming. The power of the sun, folks. Solar espresso is apparently a thing now. My ancestors would be proud, or concerned. I poured myself a gritty, bitter cups, lightly metallic from the overcooked water bottle, and sat under the minuscule shade of my trailer's awning. I took a sip. It was indescribably weird. Not bad, not good, just wrong. Like drinking coffee brewed in a parking lot. Still, there was something charming about it. The absurdity, the survivalist vibes, the light threat of heat stroke. I slumped in my folding chair and tried to pretend I was one of those old-timey explorers, writing in a leather-bound journal. Day 2. The heat has claimed my socks. I fear I may soon perish. As I sat there, sweating into my eyebrows, I noticed something moving in the sand nearby. At first I thought it was a mirage, but no, it was an honest-to-goodness lizard, waddling confidently like it had a meeting to get to. This was a chuckwalla, I later found out. Harmless desert lizard, chunky little body, and the coolest part, when threatened, it crawls into crevices and inflates its body to wedge itself in so tight that predators can't pull it out. A reel can't touch this kind of vibe. I respected it deeply. It stopped, turned its tiny head toward me, and blinked, probably wondering what kind of idiot was voluntarily roasting out here. I raised my coffee in solidarity, and it scampered off, leaving behind little claw prints like dashes in the sand. That moment of mild lizard zen was quickly interrupted by a whoosher, sudden, loud gust of wind that slammed into me like a wall. Hot wind, violently hot wind. It didn't cool you off, it scorched you. Imagine standing next to a jet engine made entirely of desert breath. I stumbled back, spilling what was left of my coffee on my leg. Fun fact, the splash was warm enough to sting. Desert winds in Death Valley can hit 50 miles per hour. Especially around the open stretches near the sand dunes. They're not playful breezes, they're like nature trying to slap the sunscreen off your face. And don't even get me started on how hard it is to keep your hat on. I saw a guy chase his fedora into a cactus patch later that day. He came out, victorious. But with several regrets. As the gusts picked up, I decided to check out the nearby Mesquite Flat sand dunes. I figured, hey, dunes are beautiful, soft sand. Maybe I'll get some nice wide shots. I regretted this almost instantly. Climbing a sand dune in 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat is like trying to hike up a tilted treadmill made of hot sugar. Each step sinks, your shoes fill with fire particles, and the sun's reflection off the sand burns your eyeballs from the inside. Even with sunglasses, I was blinking like someone had tossed glitter in my eyes. The top of the first dune rewarded me with a panoramic view of what I now understood to be a vast, sandy griddle. I pulled out my phone to snap a photo, and it immediately dimmed the screen, then shut down with a sad little chirp. Too hot. Even my tech had had enough. Did you know that smartphones will automatically shut off if their internal temperature goes above 113 degrees Fahrenheit? Death Valley was literally killing my phone. I tried sticking it under my shirt, thinking my sweat-soaked torso might help. That sentence, now that I hear it out loud, sounds wildly ill-advised, but the wind's whipping harder. I crouched near the side of a dune to shield myself. The sand pelted my arms and neck like microscopic darts. That's when I saw another creature this time, a black beetle rolling what I thought was a pebble. But no, it was a ball of dung. That's right, I was now sharing my misery with a dessert. Dung beetle, just doing its thing, thriving. Dung beetles are fascinating little creatures. Some species navigate using the Milky Way. Yes, those poop rollers use starlight as their GPS. The universe really does have a sense of humor. I sat there for a while, watching this beetle roll its prize away, marveling at how desert creatures just deal with this. Me, I was a glistening mess of regret and boiling electrolytes. The beetle, professional, elegant, confident. Eventually, the wind calmed down enough for me to stagger back to the car. My feet felt like they were roasting inside their socks. I peeled off a layer and found tiny heat rashes forming around my ankles. Yay, science.end. Here's a hot tip. Those mesh trucker hats, useless out here. The sun lasers right through them. My forehead now had a faint checkerboard tan. I looked like a waffle iron had kissed me. It was still only mid-morning. I was dizzy, hungry. My water bottle was empty and smelled vaguely like melted rubber. And yet, there was something wildly addicting about this place. Like it dared you to exist here, to survive. Every moment was a little battle, and I was slowly learning the rules. Next stop, the salt flats. If I didn't melt first. I refilled my water bottle at the visitor center, holding it under the shaded spigot for what felt like forever, hoping the water inside would at least pretend to be cool. It didn't. It came out like lukewarm tea. But beggars roasting in a frying pan can't be choosers, so I chugged it anyway. By 10:30 a.m., the temperature had broken 117 degrees Fahrenheit. It was time to visit Badwater Basin, the lowest point in North America, 282 feet below sea level. You'd think being lower would mean cooler air. Yeah, no. It's the kind of thinking that gets people featured in Chandraskew documentaries. Driving to the salt flats was surreal. The landscape blurred in the heat, distant hills shimmered and bent like they were made of gelatin. My car's AC groaned like it had asthma, doing its best but clearly reconsidering its life choices. Every time I touched the steering wheel, I got a light sizzle. I ended up using socks as makeshift oven mitts just to hold it. This was not in the rental agreement. The road to Badwater stretched endlessly across a sea of beige and cracked earth. I pulled over at the overlook and stepped out into a wave of pure fire. That's when it hit me. The sound, or rather, the lack of it. No birds, no rustling leaves. Just the occasional crunch of gravel under my boots, and the distant thrum of heat radiating off the ground like some kind of ghostly whisper. The salt flats looked like snow from a distance, gleaming white, glistening in the sun. But don't be fooled. This isn't your cozy alpine wonderland. This is pure mineral hell. I started walking across the cracked crust, feeling like I was crossing an alien moon. Each step crunched underfoot, the salt hissing slightly as my boots crushed its delicate crystals. The air was so dry, my lips began to crack like the ground beneath me. I applied lip balm, which instantly melted into a tiny puddle on my face. Neat. Halfway out, I paused. My water bottle still nearly full felt unusually hot. Curious, I opened the lid and took a cautious sip. Boiled. Not metaphorically, like steamed, veggie boiled. My bottle had gone full sous vide under the sun. I spit it out immediately, half laughing, half horrified. It tasted like Jim's socks and despair. I checked my skin and noticed that even with SPF 70 slathered on every exposed inch, I was still baking. Sunscreen only does so much when you're standing on what's basically a natural mirror reflecting solar death rays up at you. Here's a fun, historic tidbit I remembered in my moment of dehydration. In ancient Egypt, people used crocodile dung mixed with oil as a form of sunscreen. I am not joking. It was believed to offer both protection from the sun and spiritual safeguarding. Imagine that, smelling like a swamp and still getting sunburned. No wonder mummies always looked so over it. Back on the salt flats, things started to feel a little weird. The light was playing tricks on me. I squinted out toward the horizon and saw what looked like a shimmering pool of water rippling, inviting. I knew it was a mirage, a classic desert illusion caused by the refraction of light through layers of hot air. Still, for a moment, I believed it. My brain whispered, maybe just a little closer. I didn't go closer. I know how those stories end. Spoiler, they don't end well. Plus, my legs were starting to feel like spaghetti left in the sun. And here's a quirky side fact for you. Some desert animals, like the thorny devil lizard in Australia, can absorb water through their skin via capillary action between their scales. Nature is out here evolving water bottle hacks, while I'm carrying around a literal jug of regret. I finally turned back, head spinning slightly. The return walk to the car felt 3 times longer than the way out. Every step was a mental negotiation. Just one more, and then you can lie down in the shade, cry a little, and eat a granola bar. I reached the vehicle, yanked the door open, and instantly recoiled. The inside temperature had hit sauna within levels. The leather seat burned my thigh through my pants. I threw a towel down to sit on, cursed lightly under my breath, PG-13, don't worry, and started the engine. That AC fan, yeah, it was blowing hotter air than the outside for the first 60 seconds. I sat there like a human dumpling in a plastic steam basket, wondering if I should have brought a cooling vest or one of those ridiculous umbrella hats. In hindsight, yes. As the car finally started cooling, I leaned back and let out a long exhale. I was drenched, exhausted, salt-crusted, and this was still technically morning. The desert didn't care about me. It didn't care that I had hydration, tablets, or SPF armor, or good intentions. It just was brutal, majestic, unapologetically alive. I turned to look at the salt flats one more time. From inside the vehicle, with the windows rolled up and a whisper of a sea finally reaching my cheek, it looked peaceful, like a world frozen in time. But step out there without water, without shade, and you'd understand why Badwater got its name. Early pioneers tried drinking from the briny puddles and got violently ill, hence Badwater. Creative naming, 1800s style. I took another sip of what was now my second attempt at chilled water, this time from a cooler that had, miraculously, not completely given up yet. It was glorious. I'd never appreciated cold water more in my life. It might have been the most spiritual moment of the entire trip, with my heartbeat finally slowing to something human. I turned the key, shifted into drive, and headed toward the next part of the valley. The sun was high, the heat was rising, and so was my determination to see this crazy day all the way through. The road out of Badwater Basin shimmered like molten glass. I was starting to understand why so many people here wore wide-brimmed hats, sun sleeves, and the haunted expression of someone who's seen a thermometer hit triple digits before breakfast. And it was only 11:30 a.m. I figured if I was going to fully lean into the Death Valley experience, I should try hiking to an actual point of interest. So I picked the easiest one I could find that didn't involve any climbing or potential encounters, with rattlesnakes in their snackier mood. The Salt Flats trailhead, simple, flat, open, and stupidly exposed. I parked the car near the trail sign, gave myself a motivational slap on the shoulder, which instantly made me sweat more, and stepped out into the frying pan again. I'd filled my water bottle from the cooler, stuffed a cooling towel down the back of my neck, and wrapped a bandana around my face, like I was entering a post-apocalyptic grocery store. Let's be real, my fashion sense was less Instagram desert aesthetic and more accidental Mad Max extra. The salt crust crunched under my boots like stale cornflakes. The glare was intense. Even with polarized lenses, I had to squint like I was trying to read a menu through a welding mask. There were no clouds, just a giant, blazing sun perched in the center of a blue canvas, radiating heat like a vengeful space heater. It felt like I was walking across a giant dinner plate that had been left in the oven too long. Each step sank slightly into the brittle, crusty surface, revealing jagged hexagonal patterns where the salt had dried and cracked. Nature's own tile work. At some point, I stopped moving and just listened. Not a sound, not even wind this time. That's the weird thing about Death Valley. Silence isn't peaceful here, it's eerie. It's not meditation retreat silence. It's you're alone and the earth is watching you silence. After about 15 minutes of walking, I was already feeling it, the fatigue. Not the long hike kind, but the deep, bone-level fatigue of being in a literal oven. My tongue felt like it had grown sandpaper. My eyes were dry, and my skin had that uncomfortable tightness that comes before it decides to become a lobster impersonation. I stopped and looked around. Miles of glittering salt, a few distant specks that might have been other hikers or heat-induced hallucinations. My shadow, short and stubby under the high sun. looked like it was trying to crawl back into the car. And then I made the classic mistake of checking my phone, or trying to. The screen lit up with a warning. Temperature. iPhone needs to cool down before you can use it. Great. Second device. Failure of the day. I slipped it into my chest pocket, hoping my sweaty body would somehow cool it down a plan. That, let's be honest, was both gross and unscientific. Speaking of unscientific, did you know that your sense of thirst is one of the least reliable survival tools in the desert? By the time you feel thirsty, you're already mildly dehydrated. That's why seasoned hikers out here use a sip every 15 minutes rule, even if they don't feel it. Me, I took a giant chug every time I remembered, which meant approximately whenever I tripped or panicked. So often. Eventually, I turned back. I'd gone far enough into the salt to earn the selfie, but not far enough to be a news story. My shirt was soaked down the back, and my socks made squelching noises and other unpleasant surprise. Apparently, my sweat had nowhere to go but down, into my boots, where it would live forever. Back at the trailhead, I plopped down on the edge of the car's open trunk and downed half a protein bar in a single dry-chewed gulp. It tasted like cardboard. Hot cardboard. Still, calories are calories when your body's threatening to abandon ship. Just then, a pair of tourists passed by. One of them, a guy in a neon tank top and flip-flops, nodded at me and said, "Beautiful. Out here, huh?" His skin was redder than a boiled shrimp. I wanted to tell him to turn around before he melted, but I didn't have the energy to play desert lifeguard. Instead, I gave a polite, raspy yup and tried not to look like I was actively hallucinating. Back in the driver's seat, I cranked the AC again and watched as beads of sweat began to rehydrate my shirt, like a reverse laundry cycle. Outside, the temperature gauge read 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Noon was approaching. The valley was officially preheating for something truly ridiculous. I remembered reading about an old ghost town not far from here, where early miners once lived, worked, and probably dehydrated. That would be my next stop. But first, I had to make peace with the fact that I had spent over an hour under the sun and had almost boiled my own water. Supply again. At least, I wasn't like the early pioneers who literally carried barrels of water on donkeys across this place, hoping to strike it rich in borax or silver. Many of them didn't make it. One guy supposedly mistook a pile of quartz for ice and tried to chew it. Jury's still out on whether that story is true, but it's exactly the kind of thing this place inspires. Heatstroke myths, sun-fried brains, poor decisions made under a blue sky that burns with judgment. By now, the heat had a personality. It wasn't just weather, it was a presence. Like a bored demigod slowly turning the dial and watching to see who would crack. First, spoiler, probably me. As I pulled away from the salt flats, I looked in the rearview mirror and caught one last glimpse of the glimmering white sheet. It looked serene, still, almost peaceful, like it hadn't just tried to melt my soul 10 minutes ago. That's the thing about Death Valley. From a distance, it looks like serenity. Up close, it's a slow-cooked reality check, and I was only halfway through the day. I didn't expect the desert to mess with my head this fast. It started somewhere between the turnoff from Badwater Road and the dry, cracked shoulder where I'd pulled over to stretch my legs. I was driving north toward Artist's Palette, a kaleidoscopic outcrop of mineral-stained rock. The road coiled through rolling hills like a lazy snake, and the sunlight bounced off the pavement in surreal, fluid waves. Everything shimmered. Everything looked slightly wrong. At first, I just thought my sunglasses were dirty, but then, as I stepped out and walked a short distance from the car, I saw it, a shimmering pool of blue, just beyond a gentle rise, still, inviting. Water. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it. But part of me, maybe the same part that thought the last protein bar tasted like hope, wanted it to be real. It looked like a lake, gently rippling under the sky, nestled between salt hills and parched flats. My brain, half-boiled by now, whispered, "You never know. This might be the one exception." So I started walking toward it. Every few feet, the lake shifted, the edges blurred, the whole thing twitched, like it was being broadcast on a screen with bad reception. And yet, I kept walking, because I'm an optimist. Or an idiot. Same difference in the desert. About 5 minutes in, I tripped over a cracked patch of earth and snapped out of it. The lake was gone. Just gone. What I'd been chasing was a mirage, a fata morgana to be precise. A type of optical illusion. caused when light rays bend over layers of hot and cool air near the surface. It's not just a fun trick of the eyes. It's a masterclass in how the atmosphere can straight up gaslight you. The ancients believed mirages were signs from the gods. Sailors used to chase them across open seas. Soldiers in deserts followed them for days, thinking they were cities or oases. Entire myths were born from mirages. And now, here I was, dusty, sunburned, and probably dehydrated, adding my name to the long list of people who got punked by the heat. I sat down on a low rock ledge and wiped my face with the edge of my shirt. The heat clung to me like an extra skin. Even the breeze when it came felt like it had been microwaved first. I drank from my water bottle, which blessedly was only room temperature this time. The silence returned, that heavy, pulsing silence of the desert that makes your own heartbeat sound loud. Even the insects were hiding, probably under little umbrellas or tiny leaf hammocks. Smart bugs. I leaned back, looked up at the sky, and saw a vulture circling overhead. 1, 2 loops. Then it drifted lazily to the east, like even it couldn't be bothered today. I figured I should take advantage of this break in existential heat-related panic. So I pulled out my journal to jot down notes. Yes, I keep a journal. No, you can't read it, but I will share this gem I scribbled in all caps. Do not chase imaginary lakes. They are liars. Also need snacks. Profound. Here's a random historical twist for you. In the 1800s, Death Valley was briefly marketed to East Coast settlers as a health retreat. No joke. People believed that the dry desert air could cure tuberculosis and other ailments, so they'd come out here, rent cabins, and just ... sweat for weeks. They called it sun therapy. I call it very aggressive sauna cosplay. Refreshed, relatively speaking, I wandered back to the car and resumed my drive. I passed a weathered sign that read Devil's Golf Course, and of course I had to stop. The place is named because, quote, only the devil could play golf here, which feels accurate, considering it's a giant field of jagged salt formations that could slice your ankles open faster than a sarcastic comment. I stood there for a while, marveling at the alien surface. It looked like someone had frozen an ocean, then hit it with a sledgehammer and sprinkled it with powdered bone. Each clump of salt was neck-twisted, cracked, as if trying to escape the ground. I tapped one with my boot, and it crumbled with a crunch that sounded almost like breaking glass. The air shimmered again, even more intensely now. I'd already been fooled once, so I didn't chase this illusion. But it did look like a shimmering city in the distant silver towers, a flicker of blue, maybe a palm tree. I knew it was just heat bending the sky. But still, my brain wanted to believe. I had to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes, when you've sweat through 3 layers of clothing and your socks feel like squishy boiled noodles, laughter is all you have left. I got back in the car and cranked the AC. The Mirage City faded behind me, and just like that, I was back in reality. A sunburned traveler with a foggy phone, crusty lips, and a slowly dwindling supply of snacks. But I still had my sense of humor, my journal, and a deep respect for lizards and vultures alike. It wasn't even 1 p.m. yet, but the day was far from over. By the time the sun hit its brutal zenith, just shy of 1 p.m., I could smell my own sunscreen cooking. The scent was somewhere between coconut and melted ambition. I'd pulled into a small rest area off the road near the edge of the artist's palette loop, thinking I'd take a break under one of those shaded benches. Spoiler, the shade covered exactly enough space for 2 lizards and an expired granola bar. I sat anyway, legs splayed, trying to find the one angle where the sun wasn't aiming directly at my eyeballs. No luck. Even the shadows in Death Valley felt like they came with a sunroof. I was starving too. All the snacks in my backpack, protein bars, trail mix, and a suspiciously sticky bag of fruit, chews felt like they'd been stored in an armpit. But then I remembered the sandwich I'd wrapped in foil and left in the car earlier that morning. A completely non-refrigerated turkey and cheddar disaster waiting for me in a literal metal box. Still, protein was protein. I retrieved it with great ceremony and unwrapped the foil. It was ... warm, like someone had given it a hug. I poked it with a finger, it squished back. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if this was how food poisoning got its start. Then, I had a better idea. I spread the foil sandwich on the black asphalt in a sunny spot near the car, weighed down the corners with rocks, and set a timer. Because if you're going to eat something that might kill you, It may as well be solar-cooked. While it baked, I cracked open a warm bottle of soda, which immediately fizzed like I'd shaken it. A trickle of brown syrup ran down my hand. I drank it anyway, because hydration is hydration even if it tastes like battery acid. 10 minutes later, I checked the sandwich. The cheese had melted. The turkey was steaming. It smelled edible. I gave it the OL desert sniff test inhale while squinting and hoping for the best, and took a bite. You know what? It was surprisingly good. Hot sandwich in the desert, 8 out of 10. Would recommend. Just don't use mayo. I was sitting cross-legged on the gravel, chewing thoughtfully and mentally composing a TikTok caption about my desert air fryer, when I remembered something I'd read. Ancient Egyptians weren't the only people to use bizarre materials for sun protection. Some early cultures in the Middle East and Africa used a blend of animal fat, red ochre, and yes, crocodile poop to shield themselves from UV rays. The poop, allegedly, had reflective qualities. Imagine lathering up in that and heading to the beach. Smells like protection and prehistoric regret. Of course, modern scientists debate whether these methods were effective or just ancient pseudoscience. But either way, the mental image of someone smearing dung across their forehead and saying, "Time to hit the dunes," gave me a good chuckle in the oppressive heat. And hey, it's not that far off from some of today's trends. Ever looked at a skincare label and thought, why is there snail slime in this? Yeah, we're not that evolved. With my solar sandwich mostly devoured, I leaned back on my elbows and let the heat just be. Not fight it, not hide from it, just experience it. Which sounds poetic, until your thighs stick to the pavement and you realize you've branded yourself with the waffle pattern from your cargo shorts. That's when I saw another desert creature, small, fast, and very, very cool. A kangaroo rat. These little guys can survive their entire lives without ever drinking water. Not once. Their kidneys are so efficient that they absorb every drop of moisture from the seeds they eat. I watched it for a moment as it dashed across the path and disappeared under a bush like a caffeinated popcorn kernel. Nature is wild, of course. While kangaroo rats are chilling out here with their no-drink lifestyles, I was sucking down lukewarm Gatorade like it was the elixir of life. Respect, just as I was contemplating whether lying down on hot gravel counted as meditation or just heatstroke pre-gaming, I heard the familiar whine of a rental car pull up. Out stepped a family with kids in matching bucket hats and a dad holding a GoPro like it was the Holy Grail. The mum saw me and asked, "Is it safe to eat lunch out here?" I looked down at my empty foil, the ghost of a sandwich still steaming. Beside me I said, "Only if you like it extra crispy." She laughed nervously. The dad started filming. "You're welcome, internet." They didn't stay long, just long enough to grab a photo and leave, their flip-flops making that pat-pat-pat sound of people who deeply underestimated the temperature. Once they were gone, the silence returned, again thick, humming, alive. I packed up my mess, made sure I wasn't leaving anything behind, leave only footprints, take only questionable food memories, and crawled back into the car. The seatbelt burned my arm like a branding iron. I hissed and flung it away before trying again with my shirt as a buffer. Everything was hot. My sunglasses, the steering wheel, the air inside the glove box, even the napkins felt preheated. I stared out the windshield for a moment before starting the engine. In the distance, heat waves rose in shimmering lines, dancing across the desert floor like ghost fires. Death Valley doesn't just warm you up, it cooks you from the inside out. And you know what? I wasn't even mad about it. I swear I heard a pop when my phone finally gave out. Not like a cartoon explosion, just a soft, pitiful blip as the screen faded to black. The poor thing had been overheating for hours, shoved into my sweaty pocket and occasionally dragged out to film something for the vlog. Now it was done, finished, toasted like everything else in Death Valley. I poked it, pressed the power button, cursed it gently. Nothing. It had officially gone into emergency shutdown mode. No GPS, no camera, no entertainment, no texting friends. To say lol, I might die here. I was on my own now. Well, not entirely. I still had a mapper, real paper map. You remember those? Big, crinkly, full of squiggly lines and a very vague sense of scale. Mine had a coffee ring on it and smelled like permanent marker. But it was about to become my most treasured possession. I unrolled it on the passenger seat and tried to orient myself. The glare made it nearly impossible to read. I turned it sideways, upside down, held it against the windshield like a desperate squirrel. Still confusing. Meanwhile, every plastic item in the car was melting into a slow, sad puddle. The dashboard had developed a slight, sticky sheen. The steering wheel felt like it had been dipped in molasses and fire. Even the buttons on the radio were squishier than I remembered. My lip balm, liquid. My granola bar, a soft, nutty goop. You don't really understand thermal degradation until you've watched a pack of gum liquefy in your glove box. My solar charger, cleverly strapped to the roof earlier that morning, was the only thing still clinging to life. I plugged in my backup camera and set it to charge, but even that was sluggish. Batteries don't like heat, and this was a battery's worst nightmare. Desperate, I opened the car door and tried airing it out. A blast of outside heat surged in and smacked me across the face like, "Excuse me, did you forget where you are?" Fair point. I stepped outside, blinking against the brightness, and instantly regretted it. My eyes felt like they were being flash-fried. I blinked behind my sunglasses and staggered into the closest patch of shade I could find, basically the shadow of a nearby rock about the size of a toaster. While I crouched there, pathetically, I noticed something shiny in the distance. Something metal, something ... old. It looked like a rusty structure clinging to the hillside, a remnant of the past, possibly a mirage, but worth investigating. I grabbed my pack, tucked the dead phone away like a fallen comrade, and started walking toward it. Each step was like wading through invisible lava. The heat pressed in from above, below, even the sides. I was sweating in places I didn't know could sweat. My belt buckle had turned into a branding iron. I made the mistake of touching my necklace and nearly shrieked. Still, curiosity pushed me on, and there it was. The remains of an old borax mining outpost, half sunken into the rock face like a forgotten fossil. A few timber beams, a rusted wheel, and the skeletal frame of a cart track leading off into nowhere. I stood there, panting, and tried to imagine what it must have been like 100 years ago. Men working these hills in wool clothing, with no sunscreen, no fans, no electrolyte gummies, just grit, faith, and the occasional mule. I felt an overwhelming sense of awe, or maybe that was dizziness, hard to tell. Then I remembered a tale I'd read about a ghost town nearby that had supposedly vanished during a freak heatwave in the 1930s. Locals called it Ash Bluff. The story goes that the miners left in a hurry, some abandoning tools and supplies in place. Legend says the mercury thermometer broke before it could finish climbing. Some claim it hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit. No one knows what happened exactly, but heat stroke, dehydration, and a lack of infrastructure likely played their parts. Some historians say it's more myth than reality, a cautionary tale passed between rangers and curious hikers, but you can't deny the vibe. The desert remembers. I ran my hand along a rusted beam, the metal surprisingly cool in the shade. A single drop of sweat fell from my chin and sizzled on the rock below. There's a certain poetry to that, a kind of ritual offering to the land. Then I heard something, a crick faint, like wood shifting under pressure. I froze. Maybe the wind. Except there was no wind. Not anymore. Everything had gone eerily still. Another creak. I turned around slowly, expecting ... I don't know, maybe a ghostly miner with sunburn and unfinished business. But nope, just a desert squirrel, darting across the path, dragging what looked like an old can tab. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thanks for the heart attack. Nature. The sun had begun its slow descent, though you wouldn't know it by the heat. Still 122 degrees Fahrenheit. According to my analog car thermometer, which may or may not have been designed by a sadist. I trudged back to the car and flopped inside, too tired to care about the burning seat or the weird plastic smell that was getting stronger by the minute. I poured water on my shirt and pressed it to my face like a holy relic. For a second, I considered just sleeping in the driver's seat, but even my desperation had limits. Eventually, I rolled down the windows and let the heat flow in and out like a dragon breathing in reverse. Somewhere, a buzzard, co-ed. My phone was still dead. My GPS, useless. My snacks were now more sauce than solid, but somehow, I felt ... content, like I'd earned a merit badge for desert dumbassery, level 3. I looked out across the sand, past the twisted remnants of the mine, and whispered, I get it now. The desert doesn't want you to conquer it. It just wants you to acknowledge it. The road away from the ghostly mine wound slowly up into the sunburned hills. I'd left behind the twisted iron beams and scorched silence of that lost outpost, but the memory clung to me like the sweat now soaking through the fourth shirt of the day. Spoiler, I only packed 3. My phone was still unresponsive. My water was down to I could drink this, but I'd rather cry. And I had a weird sunrash forming under my wristwatch that looked vaguely like the continent of Africa. A souvenir, I guess. As the car rattled over an uneven patch of gravel, I started talking to myself. Not like deep philosophical ramblings, but more like, turn left. Is this a left? Looks like a left. Or death. Let's find out. I was headed toward Dante's View, a high-elevation overlook that offered what was allegedly one of the most breathtaking vistas in the entire park. A perfect place to get some perspective. A perfect place, also, to hallucinate a spaghetti monster in the clouds if the heat got to you first. But the road was longer than I expected, and steeper. My little Rentalin, aging compact with a cooling system held together by willpower, was not having a good time. The temperature gauge flirted with the danger zone. I turned off the AC, which was like cutting off my oxygen supply, and rolled down the windows to let in the fresh air. It was like trying to breathe inside a toaster. Somewhere along the incline, I saw a shimmer on the side of the road, something unnatural. I slowed and pulled over, curiosity overriding common sense yet again. It was a small metal marker, half buried in dust, worn nearly smooth by time. I wiped it off and squinted at the faded letters. Site of the Ash Bluff expedition. 1934 Ash Bluff again. That mythical ghost town I'd read about. Could have been coincidence, or desert lore trying to grab my attention one more time. I sat there for a second, car idling, thoughts swirling like heat mirages, and then, without any real plan, I reached into the glove box, pulled out the melted remains of a granola bar, and left it beside the marker. Call it an offering, or just a weird sugar-based tribute to the past. Another 20 minutes up the mountain road, and I was there. Dante's View. And friends. It was worth every sun-blistered second. The overlook perched high above the salt flats, about 5,475 feet. Up, below me, the basin spread out like a painting. Whites and greys and soft pinks glistened under the afternoon sun. The landscape curved gently between mountain ridges, heat waves rising in shimmering curtains. I could see Badwater Basin where I'd been earlier, now just a distant smudge of light. The air was thinner here, not much cooler, but just enough that the heat didn't wrap around my skull like a wet towel. A breeze rolled through, weak but real. I closed my eyes and let it hit my face. It was the first time all day I didn't feel like a roasted marshmallow. In hiking boots, I wasn't alone up there. A woman sat cross-legged on a rock, sketching. Another guy, maybe late 50s, full safari gear, was peering through binoculars. He looked at me and nodded like we'd both been through the same war. Maybe we had. And then there was him, the guy with the wide-brimmed hat and water bottle belt, pacing in slow circles and muttering at first. I thought he was just talking on a Bluetooth headset. Nope. Double quotes, sand ghosts, he said aloud. You can't trust them. They got fingers like spaghetti. Okay, not a phone call. He wandered off into the scrub brush, still muttering, still alive in whatever realm he was navigating. The others ignored him, like this was standard Dante's View behavior. Maybe it was. Maybe I'd be him. In an hour, as the sun hovered toward its 3 p.m. slouch, I started to feel the edges of my reality go soft. Not in a dangerous way, not yet, but the heat was tugging at my brain, making my thoughts syrupy. I sat on a stone bench and stared out at the valley, watching shadows creep across the salt below. And then I saw something, or thought I did. A camel. Not walking, just standing, alone, off in the far distance. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Gone camels haven't roamed here for over 100 years. But fun fact, the US Army once imported dromedary camels in the 1850s for transport across the desert. It was called the Camel Corps, and they actually worked pretty well until people realized camels spit, bite, and don't particularly care for marching orders. The project was eventually scrapped, but every now and then, someone claims to spot a phantom camel in Death Valley. Were my cooked eyeballs seeing one? Or was this my first official heat hallucination? Either way, I whispered, "Nice try," into the air and drank the last of my hot Gatorade. It tasted like regret and citrus. Then I lay back, right there on the warm stone, letting the last sun rays hit my face. Not baking this time, just ... warming, comforting almost, like the sun wasn't mad anymore. I stayed like that for a while, drifting, dreaming of cooler places, air-conditioned diners, ice cream sandwiches that weren't literal sandwiches baked on asphalt, and somewhere between reality and sleep, I thought about the phrase I'd read once, "Only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun." I wasn't English. Draw your own conclusions. Somewhere around 3:30 p.m., I forced myself to leave Dante's View, not because I wanted to, but because my brain had started to flirt with the idea of just staying there forever. You know, build a sunproof cave, raise desert squirrels as pets, maybe write a memoir called Too Hot to Function. My life as a salted raisin. But I knew better. The sun wasn't done with me yet. Back in the car, I eased down the winding mountain road, grateful for gravity, but deeply aware that my brakes might stage a mutiny. The temperature was climbing again. Despite being higher up, I could feel the heat wrapping around the car like cling film. Halfway down, I heard a strange worry noise, then a groan, then silence. I tapped the gas. Nothing. Tried the ignition. Again, the engine gave me the mechanical version of a middle finger, and then just gave up. Now, you might think being stranded in Death Valley with a dead battery is a worst-case scenario, but let me tell you, it's worse when the sun is directly above you. The temperature is over 124 degrees Fahrenheit, and the nearest help is somewhere between good luck and send a raven. I sat there in the driver's seat, sweating through my optimism, and began rummaging through my bag for anything vaguely useful. That's when I remembered my emergency kit. What was in it? A crumpled mylar blanket, a roll of duct tape, a half-eaten bag of trail mix, all raisins to pieces of gum, and a stack of national park brochures. Not exactly MacGyver-grade supplies, but I was desperate. I had a brilliant red, borderline stupid idea. Build a makeshift sunshade to keep the car's interior from turning into a literal oven. I taped the brochures together, using what little duct tape I had left, and affixed the patchwork shade across the inside of the windshield. It sagged in the middle. One corner kept flopping down like a lazy dog ear, but it helped dash barely. I chewed a piece of gum and stuck it to the dashboard to keep a flap of shade in place. It melted almost immediately into a minty puddle. My MacGyver moment. Ruined. But I pressed on. Next up, water inventory. I had one bottle left, half full, slightly warm, probably my most treasured possession. I cradled it like a baby bird, and took the tiniest sip. Then I poured a few drops onto my bandana and tied it around my neck. That sensation-cool fabric against scorched skin was the closest thing to joy I'd felt since breakfast. While I sat there stewing, I reflected on how modern cars really aren't built for this level of apocalypse. Turns out, high temperatures can vapor-lock your fuel line, cook your battery fluid, and even cause your tires to burst from the inside out. Basically, your car turns into a fancy toaster on wheels. I flipped through the pages of a Death Valley brochure, now mostly shredded from my shade, contraption, and found a section called Surviving Extreme Heat. The first line read, "Avoid strenuous activity between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. I laughed out loud, a dry, wheezy sort of laugh that sounded like an old VHS rewinding. I'd broken every rule in the book. I was the rule book, a cautionary tale in real time. Then I remembered something a ranger told me on the first day. If your vehicle breaks down, stay with it. Don't try to walk for help. But that's assuming your vehicle isn't turning into a mobile sauna, filled with salt-encrusted socks and emotional regret. I popped the trunk, climbed out, and started building a real sunshade, this time on the outside of the car. I used my sweaty shirt, my crumpled mylar blanket, and the remaining brochures to rig a half cover over the driver's side window. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't stable, but it cast a small shadow, just big enough for me to sit beside the car and pretend I wasn't slowly baking into a human casserole. While I huddled there, I scribbled notes in my journal. Just keywords at first: melting battery, gum engineering failure, hallucinated camel again. The heat distorted my thoughts. Everything slowed. I began imagining my rescue as a dramatic movie scene, a helicopter hovering overhead, a park ranger in aviators descending with a bottle of Gatorade and a towel, emotional orchestral music, me weeping into the dust like a sunburned action hero. But no one came. Instead, I spotted something fluttering toward me, small, white, erratic. A moth? Nope. Just ash, probably from the hot engine, or a nearby bush too dry to live. I checked my phone again. Still dead. My camera, also dead. My faith in automotive engineering, hanging by a single thread of melted duct tape. And yet, I felt oddly calm, like I'd passed the threshold of discomfort and entered a new stage. Desert acceptance. I closed my eyes. The hot wind hissed past my ears. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled long, low, lonely dot. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but it came again, closer this time. Coyotes are survivors, adaptable. They hunt at night, nap in the shade during the day, and they rarely mess with humans unless very desperate. I wasn't afraid, just ... intrigued. Like maybe the desert was sending me a guide. And right on cue, I saw one. Thin, grey, sharp, dash-eyed. It stood maybe 50 feet away, half shadowed by a rock outcrop, watching me like I was the weird one. It didn't move. I didn't move. We stared at each other for a full minute. Then it gave a small, dismissive yawn, turned around, and walked off. Fair enough. Eventually, the engine cooled enough to try starting the car again. It wheezed, coughed, then, life. The dash flickered on. The AC wheezed back into existence. I laughed, again, not because it was funny, but because the desert had let me go, but not without a warning. I coasted down the road like a desert-scarred survivor, hair wild, shirt damp, car wheezing like it had just run a marathon in dress shoes. The AC was now blowing slightly less hot. Improvement I welcomed, like it was a standing ovation. Dante's view was behind me. The mystery coyote was gone. The hallucinated camel, still emotionally present. It was just past 4:15 p.m., and I figured I'd stop at the next scenic pullout to catch my breath and check my gear. I needed to know what was working, what was melted, and what might soon explode. No basic traveler. Housekeeping. The sun had begun its gentle descent, casting gold and amber streaks across the valley. Beautiful, sure, but don't be fooled. The temperature was still clinging to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, like it had something to prove. I was beginning to suspect the sun was personally offended by my SPF 70. I pulled over next to a small viewpoint surrounded by jagged rocks and brittle brush. I turned off the ignition, whispered a little please, start again later prayer to the car, and stepped out. The heat hit me like a slap from a fire elemental. I stumbled, caught myself, and immediately began searching for a shady patch, just enough space to sit and reorganize. I found a rock formation offering about 14 inches of filtered shade. Good enough. I dropped to the ground, unzipped my pack, and assessed the damage. Phone, still dead. Backup camera, partially charged. Overheating. Energy bar, melted beyond identification. Might have once been peanut butter, might be shoe polish now. Maps, wrinkled and sweat-stained, but holding strong just like me. And then it happened. I turned the key to start the car again, just to check. Nothing. Even a wheeze. This time. Silence. The battery had finally called it quits. I sat there, stunned, heat-dumb and motionless. I blinked, licked my dry lips, stared at the lifeless dashboard. This wasn't like before, where the engine just needed a cool-down break. This was a full system shutdown. The battery had likely been fried, and now I was completely stranded. For the briefest second, I felt a twinge of panic, the kind that tickles your spine. But then, almost comically, the wind picked up and slapped me in the face with a gritty gust of hot air, and I laughed. Of course this happened. Of course it did. It was the natural progression of my day. So, I did what any logical person would do when stranded in the hottest place on earth with a dead car and a dying sense of stability. I built another sunshade. I scavenged more brochures, my now empty snack wrappers, and even tore the cover off a travel magazine someone had left in the glove box. With duct tape, chewing gum, and sheer determination, I rigged a shimmering awning from the open passenger door to a nearby rock. It looked like a survivalist's Pinterest fail, but it cast a shadow on. That's all that mattered. I crawled underneath it, pulled out my half-drenched journal, and began writing. Hour 10. Battery, dead. Phone, useless. Water, rationed. Mood, deliriously optimistic. Plan, unknown. Hope, intactish. My handwriting looked like a chicken had tried to write cursive during an earthquake, but I didn't care. Then came the real kicker, a buzzard. I kid you not, It circled above me like some cliché from a spaghetti western. One loop, two, three, then it perched on a nearby rock and stared, tilting its head, like, "You good down there?" I raised my water bottle and toasted it. "Not today, feathered friend, not today." Here's a gross but fascinating fact. Vultures specifically, turkey vultures urinate on their own legs to cool off. The process is called urohydrosis. The evaporating liquid draws heat away from their bodies. I did not try that strategy, in case you were wondering. But if this trip had lasted another hour, I might have considered it. As I sat there, cooling off under my DIY tarp of disappointment, I started rummaging through the glove box again, partly out of boredom, partly out of desperation. That's when I found something magical, a mechanic's card from Furnace Creek, wedged inside the rental car's manual. I kissed it, literally, right there, sunburned lips and all. But of course, no working phone. Still, it meant that hope wasn't entirely lost. Once I flagged down anyone I could hand them the card and perform an interpretive dance to explain my plight. So I waited and waited and in that time, I started to understand something. Primal. We rely on our machines, our devices, our little bits of plastic and lithium to tell us where to go and what to do and when to do it. But out here, none of that worked. Not when the sun had other plans. I had to rely on instinct, on heat sense, on knowing when to move, when to stop, when to rest, and when to trust that a buzzard is just a bird, not a prophecy. As I stared across the desert, something strange happened. I stopped sweating. That's never a good sign. Sweating means your body's still trying, still regulating. But when it stops, that's heat exhaustion knocking. I grabbed what was left of my water, soaked my bandana, and wrapped it around my head. Like a medieval knight of the arid realm, I leaned back and tried to slow my breathing, and then, blessed sound, I heard the low hum of an engine, a vehicle. Approaching, I stumbled to my feet, waving like a maniac with a brochure in one hand, and my bandana flapping like a war flag. The car slowed, a dusty, dented SUV with two retirees inside. The woman in the passenger seat rolled down the window. "Need help?" she asked, with the casual calm of someone who's seen heat-related stupidity before. "Do buzzards circle people who don't need help?" I croaked. They let me in. Their AC was a spiritual experience. I held out the mechanic's card with the reverence of someone offering a sacred scroll. The driver nodded. "Yeah, we'll get you back." And just like that, I was rescued, sunburned, dehydrated, possibly hallucinating, but not alone. And the battery, still dead, but my soul, slightly recharged. The ride back into Furnace Creek was both the most uncomfortable and the most glorious car trip I've ever experienced. Uncomfortable because I smelled like a boiled towel and looked like a raisin in hiking boots. Glorious because I was sitting inside a functioning, air-conditioned SUV, and the seats weren't trying to melt into my skin. My rescuers, Deb and Roger from Tucson, were exactly the kind of couple you hope to find when stranded in the desert. Friendly, prepared, absolutely unfazed by the heat. Roger wore socks with sandals and carried a laminated map of the entire valley in a Ziploc bag. Professionals. As we coasted down the road, Roger pointed out landmarks like a tour guide. "Coyote Canyon's over there," he said. "We saw one this morning, looked like he was eating a lizard." "Oh." I made eye contact with his cousin, I replied. Deb passed me a water bottle from their cooler, cold water. I almost cried. I took a sip, then pressed it to my forehead and let out a satisfied guttural noise that may have alarmed some nearby wildlife. Roger laughed. "You're not the first crispy critter we've picked up out here." Crispy critter. That's exactly what I was. We talked a little about the park, their RV, and the sheer number of very bold tourists who try to hike deep trails with one bottle of water and a Bluetooth speaker. Most don't last long. Many turn back. A few end up on warning signs in the visitor center. Then Deb said, "You ever see a buzzard pee on itself to cool off?" "Not personally," I said, "but I respect it." She grinned. "We saw one do it last summer. Middle of July. Just lifted its leg like a fire hydrant." Nature's weird folks. As we drove, I spotted a few familiar landmarks. Salt flats, the dunes in the distance, the very rock that tried to swallow my ankle 3 hours ago. And then we passed something that made me ask them to stop. It was a single coyote, trotting along the road shoulder with its tongue lolling out. It looked lean, dusty, and totally in control. It paused, turned its head toward us, and gave me this weird, casual glance. Same one from earlier. No way to tell. But in that moment, we had another unspoken exchange. You survived. Barely. Try harder next time. Message received. Deb took a picture. Roger offered it a granola bar. The coyote ignored us all and disappeared behind a patch of sun-baked sagebrush. Back in Furnace Creek, they dropped me off near the tiny mechanic's hut that doubled as a souvenir shop. The mechanic, a leathery man with one eyebrow and a tank top that read "Too Hot to Care," said he could tow my car later and take a look. "You probably just fried your battery," he said, poking a toothpick around in his mouth. "Happens. All the time. All the time. Yep, batteries die faster out here than trust in a poker game." Charming guy. With my car temporarily out of commission, I had time to kill before sundown. I wandered toward a small shaded area near the general store and plopped down on a bench that was, miraculously, not hot enough to cook ham on. There, in the still air of late afternoon, I spotted another creature, a beetle, shiny black and plodding slowly across the gravel. I leaned closer, curious. It stopped, lifted its rear, and did something unsettling. It stood on its head. At first, I thought it was doing beetle yoga. But then I remembered, this was the Namib desert beetle, or at least a cousin. These little champions positioned themselves head down to collect moisture from the morning fog, letting droplets slide down into their mouths. It's one of nature's more bizarre but effective drinking strategies. Of course, Death Valley rarely has fog, so this beetle was probably just stretching. Still, the desert is full of these weird little hacks, bugs that survive off dew, lizards that harvest condensation on their bellies, birds that pant like dogs and defecate on their own legs, yes, vultures again to cool off. Meanwhile, I was over here using frozen bandanas and plastic bottles like a primitive fool. Watching that beetle, I couldn't help but admire how adapted everything was out here except humans. We arrive in climate-controlled cars, wrapped in breathable tech fabric, carrying a dozen apps to tell us where to stand for the best sunset photo. But the actual residents, they've evolved over millennia to thrive in this heat, with no gear, no AC, and zero granola bars. There's something humbling about that. As the sun lowered toward the ridges, the colors of the valley started to change, turning deeper, oranges stretching across the horizon like spilled fire. Even the rocks seemed to exhale. I stood up slowly, joints creaking like I was made of dry spaghetti. My shirt was stiff with salt. My lips were chapped into sandpaper. My journal pages were curling at the corners from humidity loss. I probably looked like an extra from The Mummy, but without the confidence. One last animal sighting for the day. A jackrabbit dashed across the road just as I headed back to the mechanic's shack. Huge ears, long legs, lightning fast. Nature's little sprinter. He reminded me of myself. If I'd had functioning knees and a diet of wildflowers. I reached the mechanic just as he was closing up shop. "We'll check your car tomorrow," he said. "Battery's probably cooked, but we'll slap in a new one. What do you recommend in the meantime?" I asked. He gestured toward the back of the building. "Got a cot, got a fan, got a radio that plays 3 stations. None of them good." It was perfect. I settled into my new accommodations, turned the fan to barely noticeable, and lay back with my arms folded behind my head. Outside, the desert buzzed with the quiet energy of evening life waking up, and somewhere, not far off, a coyote probably yawned and thought, "Tourists." I didn't sleep so much as I steamed for a few hours on that cot behind the mechanic's shop. The fan hummed like a broken kazoo, offering a vague breeze that mostly rearranged my sweat. The radio played scratchy country music and occasional weather updates that always ended the same. ... And yep, still hot. By 6:30 p.m., the sun had sunk enough to transform the landscape. The blinding nuclear white brightness was giving way to copper, then lavender. It was like someone had dimmed the entire desert with a soft sepia filter. I stepped outside, groggy and slightly dehydrated, to walk it off and maybe find something cooler to sit on than a vinyl cot with a death wish. That's when I noticed the rocks were glowing. Not literally glowing, but radiating. The ground still pumped out heat, like it had a vendetta. I hovered my hand a few inches over a boulder, and could feel waves of warmth rolling off it like a grudge. Death Valley is a natural heat battery. The rocks and soil absorb solar energy all day long and then slowly exhale it back out at night. It's why, even hours after sunset, The ground can still be hot enough to toast bread. Not that I had any more bread to toast. Strip, sold a sandwich. I wandered past the low-slung visitor center and found myself at a small trailhead. A sign read, Salt Creek Interpretive Walk. Mostly flat, half-mile loop, minimal rattlesnake warnings. My kind of adventure. I followed the wooden planks and dusty path through the dusk. That's when I saw them fossilized footprints. At first I thought they were just some kid's prank or weird trail art. But no, these were real, embedded in dry, compacted mud near the edge of a shallow creek bed. Not fresh, not modern. These tracks were old. It turns out that Death Valley is littered with the ghostly imprints of ancient life. Some of the oldest known human footprints in North America were discovered just a few hours away from where I was standing. And even in this spot, researchers have found traces left by prehistoric camels, mammoths, and giant sloths that once roamed the area during cooler epochs. Yes, sloths, but giant ones, like Kos. Imagine a slow-motion linebacker covered in shaggy hair, leaving dinner plate-sized footprints in the ancient mud. I crouched to look closer at one of the prints. It was faint, about the size of my hand, and shaped like a wide W animal, clearly possibly bighorn sheep, or something older. Above me, the sky had started to shift again. The colors were turning deep purple, stars poking through one by one like cautious party guests. In a place with virtually no light pollution, the night sky wasn't just pretty, it was cathedral-level humbling. That, as I stared up, I thought about how many others had stood right here, hundreds, thousands, millions of years ago. Hunters, nomads, creatures I can't pronounce. They'd walked these paths under the same stars. They'd felt the same dry wind, smelled the same earthy, baked air. I suddenly felt very small, which, weirdly, was comforting. After all, the heat, the dehydration, the fried electronics, the hallucinated camels, and my close encounter with a buzzard's disapproval, I finally felt connected to something bigger, something older. As I walked deeper into the trail, I heard a rustle. It wasn't loud, more like the whisper of sand being brushed aside. I froze, headlamp on. Two glowing eyes blinked back at me from the bushes. My fight-or-flight reflex kicked in, followed immediately by my probably just a desert rabbit logic. I took a step closer, slowly. Out darted a kit fox, a tiny, ridiculously adorable desert fox, with ears half the size of its body, and a tail that looked like a bottle brush. It paused on the path, looked at me, then trotted off like it had places to be and I wasn't important enough to acknowledge. Fair. Kit foxes are nocturnal hunters. They avoid the deadly heat by sleeping through the day and doing all their errands after dark, like goth teenagers with better cardio. Their ears help dissipate heat and hear prey under the sand. Evolution is doing its job out here, I continued. The loop, alone but surrounded by the quiet hum of desert life waking up. Crickets chirped. Somewhere, a bird trilled once and then shut up, maybe realizing it was still 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, just before the trail curved back toward the parking lot, I saw a final surprise, a tiny tarantula, crawling slowly across the path, like a sleepy shag carpet. It was about the size of my palm, and moved with a kind of deliberation that says, I own this trail now. I gave it a wide berth. Fun fact, tarantulas in this area are generally harmless to humans. Their bites are painful, but not dangerous unless you're emotionally fragile, in which case everything in the desert is dangerous. They only come out during cooler months, or like tonight when temperatures drop just enough to say, okay, fine, I'll go for a walk. As I emerged from the trail, the stars had fully taken over the sky. The Milky Way cut across the heavens like a spill of powdered sugar. I took a seat on a nearby rock, now just warm instead of surface of the sun, and leaned back. I was sore, dirty, thirsty, but also kind of glowing. Because despite everything, despite the frying heat, the vehicle failures, the existential sweat, I'd made it to nightfall, a night in Death Valley. It's pure magic. In the quiet, with stars overhead and ancient footprints underfoot, I didn't feel like an idiot tourist anymore. I felt like a traveler. Just past 8 p.m., as the last of the light drained from the sky and the temperature dared to dip below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, a milestone, break out the confetti, I wandered back toward what passed for civilization in Furnace Creek, a gas station / store / blast furnace. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a cold drink, maybe a slightly cooler patch of ground to sit on while I recalibrated my life choices. What I found was surreal. The building stood alone, buzzing with fluorescent lights that flickered like they were powered by ghost electricity. The glass door was fogged on the inside, fogged like some mythical air conditioner still lived in there. And above it, a glowing neon sign promised the impossible: ice soda shade. I walked in and immediately got slapped in the face by air that was merely warm, not volcanic. I might have teared up. The guy behind the counter, a sleepy teen in a tank top with earbuds dangling, nodded at me like he'd seen this look before. The look of a man who just crawled out of the wilderness, victorious but extremely sweaty. The place was small, dim, but stocked with all the things a desperate traveler could want. Dusty bags of chips, melted chocolate bars pretending to be one piece, cans of soda stacked like aluminum soldiers, and a cooler filled with water that looked as cold as a snowman's soul. I opened the cooler door. A wave of actual cold air hit me, and then I committed a small crime. I stood there with the door open for a full minute, just breathing. I grabbed a bottle of water and a soda, neither of which I could afford to drop because they were glass, and I had the dexterity of a toasted croissant at this point, and placed them gently on the counter. "You survived, bad?" "Huh?" the teen asked, scanning my sun-reddened face. "Barely," I croaked. He tapped the register. "That'll be 60 fee. You want a bag?" I shook my head. "I want to live." He didn't even crack a smile, just handed me my receipt and went back to scrolling through his phone. I stepped outside, sat on the station's single picnic bench, which was mercifully in the shade of the building, and cracked open the soda dot. It hissed like a snake and fizzed up immediately. I took a sip and winced. It was lava temperature. Somehow the vending coolers hadn't actually chilled anything. They'd only slowed the process of becoming soup. Still, I drank it, because carbonation at any temperature is better than no carbonation at all. And because this was now my story, and I was going to own it. Halfway through the soda, I heard footsteps. A woman with a red bandana and a DSLR slung around her neck walked up to the bench. She gave me a once-over the sunburn, the shirt that now had its own salt crust, the dazed expression of a man who'd been scolded by a buzzard. "You look like you need electrolytes," she said. "I need a new existence," I replied. She laughed. "Been there. Spent 2 days in the dunes last summer. You ever get sand so deep in your ears it crunches when you chew?" We talked, swapped war stories. She'd been shooting time-lapses of the sunset. Said she liked to sleep in her car to catch the early morning glow. I told her about the Mirage, the Beetle, the Fox, the makeshift car Shade held together with gum and desperation. She offered me some real snacks, those fancy protein cookies that come in compostable packaging and taste like someone whispered cookie over a pile of oats. I accepted one like it was a gift from the heavens. Around 9 p.m., a group of night hikers arrived. 3 of them, headlamps bobbing, all wearing the same Death Valley After Dark t-shirts. Apparently, this was a thing. Guided night hikes to see the desert come alive after the sun retreats. One guy sat near me and started unpacking gear from a bag: infrared scope, bug net, mini tripod. He looked like a wildlife researcher on a Discovery Channel budget. "You going out tonight?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nah, I've met enough weird creatures for one day, including myself." He nodded with solemn understanding. "Desert does that to you." Another woman joined us, casually mentioning she'd seen a scorpion earlier, glowing under a blacklight. "That's one of the cooler quirks of the desert. Scorpions fluoresce under UV light because of chemicals in their exoskeletons. Scientists still don't fully agree why. Some think it helps them detect light. Others think it's a kind of accidental sunscreen. The debate is ongoing." I finished my soda-turned syrup and stood up, bones cracking. My legs felt like they'd been borrowed from an action figure that had been left in a microwave. But I was upright, alive, and full of oat-based protein regret. I thanked the crew for their company and started walking back toward the mechanic's lot where my bless its scorched circuit sat, waiting for resurrection. The road was mostly empty now, just a soft breeze, a few flickering lights in the distance, and the occasional gust that smelled like hot dust and sagebrush. The stars were everywhere, and in that moment, I understood something very simple and very true. The desert doesn't want to kill you, it just wants to teach you to slow down, to sweat, to respect things older and harder than yourself, to appreciate water, cold air, and even a hot soda at the end of a long, slow-burning day. and maybe to not chase every shimmering thing that looks like salvation, because sometimes survival is just about sitting still in the dark and knowing you made it one more mile. By 10 p.m., the desert had finally begun to exhale. You could feel it, this slow, deliberate release of heat from the sand and rocks, like the earth was letting go of something it had been clenching all day. I was back near the mechanics lot, sitting on a folding chair next to my car, which looked like it had seen combat. I probably did too. The stars were insane. Not just, hey, nice stars, insane, but full planetarium mode, galaxy spilling across the sky, insane. The kind of view that makes you forget about text messages and air conditioning and the fact that your socks still squish a little. I leaned back, my spine popping in two places, and stared up at the sky like it owed me something. The fan inside the mechanic's shop rattled. Somewhere nearby, a cricket chirped like it had recently learned jazz. The ground under my boots was still hot, not warm hot, even though the sun had been gone for 2 hours. The heat was residual, stubborn, and deeply committed to the bit. I tested the temperature of a nearby boulder with the back of my hand. It was like leaning against a space heater. On medium aggression, it hit me then just how much energy this valley stores during the day. Death Valley is basically a slow-cooking oven for the planet. The rocks, sand and salt flats all absorb solar radiation like giant thermal batteries, and they don't cool off fast, not even when the sun goes down and takes all the drama with it. I looked across the valley floor and saw faint glimmers in the distance. Possibly flashlights, possibly eyes. The desert at night has a different personality, not angry, just alert, like it's watching to see who belongs and who's just visiting. I definitely fell into the second category. Just when I started wondering if I should head inside and try sleeping on that scorched cot again, I heard a sound, a low rustling, not aggressive, not close, but definitely there. I turned my head slowly. The bushes swayed once, then settled. Probably a rodent, or a lizard, or a rodent riding a lizard like a tiny cowboy. Who knows? I stayed still and listened. Another rustle, this time followed by a soft scritch on gravel. I flicked on my headlamp. Two glowing dots blinked back at me. It was a kangaroo rat, standing upright like a tiny, twitchy sentry. Its massive hind legs looked like it could outjump most Olympic athletes, and its long tail flicked behind it like it was annoyed by the weather forecast. It gave me a sideways look, squeaked once, and bolted. Kangaroo rats are amazing. They can go their entire lives without ever drinking water. They get moisture from seeds and plants, and they're so efficient that their urine is basically dust. If that's not evolution winning, I don't know what is. After the rat departed, the desert settled again, quieter, heavier. I could feel the fatigue catching up with me in a way that was different than during the day. Not the aggressive kind of tired where your body shuts down, but that soft, creeping exhaustion that hums behind your eyes and makes your limbs feel borrowed. Still, I didn't want to go inside yet, so I did something kind of weird. I lay down on the warm gravel next to my car, for long, just enough to feel the earth under me, radiating the last of the day's heat like a tired furnace. I closed my eyes and let the stars blur above me. For the first time in hours, I wasn't moving. I wasn't thinking about the next crisis. I wasn't planning anything. I just was. It sounds a little dramatic, I know, but lying there, with heat radiating up and stars falling over my face, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Stillness. Not silence, not peace, just stillness. The kind that only happens when your brain finally runs out of notifications. Of course, the moment was short-lived, because nature, as always, had other plans. I heard a tiny click nearby like something stepping onto a rock. I sat up and turned my headlamp back on. Another pair of blinking eyes. This time, a spider. Not just any spider, a big one. Maybe a wolf spider, maybe a tarantula. It looked at me. I looked at it. Mutual confusion. Then it slowly crawled off into the shadows, like we'd both agreed to pretend this never happened. Desert spiders are not my favorite desert residents, but even they have a role. Some eat insects, some eat mice, some are just there to keep you humble. With that encounter behind me, I figured it was probably time to head back into the mechanic's little fan-cooled sanctuary. As I stood and brushed gravel from my pants, I noticed something else. My water bottle, left sitting on the ground, was warmer than when I placed it there. That's right, even at night, The ground was still reheating my hydration. Impressive, and a little rude. Inside, the cot looked slightly more inviting now, less like a punishment, more like a reward. I lay down again, this time willingly, and let the hum of the fan lull me back into a half-sleep state. Outside, the desert buzzed, not loud, not constant, just ... alive. There were things moving out there. Tiny things, maybe ancient things. And even though I was a visitor and battery drained, salt-streaked eye, felt like I'd earned the right to be here, just for a little while, to lie down in a land that could easily crush you and say, yeah, I made it to nightfall. And as the heat finally began to lift, the rocks cooled down, and the stars whispered overhead, I let myself drift, because this place, this hottest place on earth, was finally letting me sleep. I woke to a faint rustle outside, and the soft flicker of dawn brushing the edge of the horizon. The fan beside me had stopped, dead silent. Either it had overheated, or simply given up. Like every other machine that crossed Death Valley's threshold, my mouth felt like it had been ousted. My tongue was a piece of driftwood. I sat up on the cot slowly, creakingly, and took a sip from the bottle beside me. Still warm, naturally. The mechanics lot was quiet. The stars had mostly vanished, retreating as the light returned, one brave hue at a time. A soft lavender painted the sky, then pink, then orange, and just like that, the world was backlit again, ready for another round of slow roasting. I stepped outside barefoot, just for a second. The gravel was still cool. Cool. I almost cried. The first time I'd felt a surface below body temperature, in what felt like days. But I knew it wouldn't last, so I grabbed my shoes, threw on the least salty of my shirts, and walked down the road a bit. I wasn't going far, just enough to see the valley waking up. The shadows were long and soft, the kind of shadows that made every rock look tall, every ridge important. The valley stretched out before me like a half-done oil painting, and rising above it, casting a gentle glow across the salt flats, was the sun. Our old frenemy. Except right now, it was gentle, quiet, golden, not angry. For the first time since arriving, it didn't feel like a heat weapon. It felt like a star, distant, glowing, promising. I sat down on a flat rock that still held the memory of the night's chill, and I just ... watched. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not the drama of midday, not the hallucinations, the car trouble, the near mirages, or survival hacks. This, the breath before the burn. Birds chirped in the distance, two of them, flitting between scrub brush like they hadn't just spent the night hiding from ghost spiders and radioactive rocks. I saw movement in the far flats, maybe another coyote, or maybe I was seeing shadows again. I didn't care. The world was turning back on, and I had front row seats. And as I sat there, soaking in this calm, it hit me just how brutal and beautiful this place truly was. You don't come to Death Valley to relax. You come here to remember that you're not in charge. You come here to watch the play world function without you. It's the quiet honesty of the place that sticks with you. The desert doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't dress itself up for company. It simply is. Endless, harsh, majestic. And if you're lucky, or unlucky enough, it'll show you something about yourself. I thought about everything I'd done over the last 24 hours, drinking hot Gatorade like it was holy water, cooking a sandwich on asphalt, communicating with buzzards, building a windshield sunshade with chewing gum, and my personal favorite, hallucinating a phantom, camel. It had all been ridiculous, absurd even, but it was also the most alive I'd felt in a long time. As I stood up and dusted off my pants, I turned back toward the mechanic's hut, now glowing in the gold of sunrise. The man himself stood on the porch, holding a coffee mug. That said, son, I barely know her. Fitting batteries fixed, he called out, voice gravelly and satisfied. Should crank up fine now. I gave him a salute. He raised his mug in return. You heading out? I nodded. Think I've earned my exit? Yeah, most people don't last long on their first day. You're one of the lucky few. Or dumb enough to stick around. He chuckled. Same difference. We shared that quiet understanding, the one you only get after you've both endured something absurd and walked away slightly more toasted than you arrived. Back at the car, I threw my gear in the back seat and settled into the driver's seat. It was ... cool. For now, but I knew in 30 minutes it'd be lava again. So I didn't waste time. I turned the key. The engine purred like a cat that had been force-fed electrolytes and promises. I grinned. before pulling away. I glanced once more at the valley. The light was creeping in faster now, painting everything in sharper contrast. It was already 87 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing, but I wasn't afraid of the heat anymore. I'd met it, shaken its sweaty hand, shared its vending machine soda, and somehow I was leaving with all my fingers and most of my dignity. Rolled down the window just a crackhand, started driving. The fan blew a light stream of early morning air across my face, and I whispered to no one in particular, "Thanks for not killing me." And from somewhere out in the brush, I swear I heard a buzzard laugh. The road away from Furnace Creek was quiet, eerily quiet, as if the whole valley was holding its breath again, waiting for the next heat wave to blow in and remind everyone who's in charge. My car hummed along, blessedly operational, with a full tank of gas and what felt like a mutual understanding between us. Don't break down again, and I won't scream at you in 4 languages. The temperature on the dashboard now read a deceptively pleasant 90 degrees Fahrenheit, practically sweater weather by Death Valley standards, but as I passed a trail marker pointing toward the Mesquite Flat sand dunes, I hesitated. Something in me wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. So I pulled over and killed the engine, grabbed my camera finally charged, thanked the stars, and made my way toward the dunes. The sun was barely peeking over the eastern ridge, casting long golden shadows across the sand. The peaks and troughs undulated like ocean waves frozen in time, glowing softly under the weight of a million years. Each step I took sank slightly into the powdery earth. The sand felt warm, not hot, warm like fresh laundry. I climbed the nearest dune, not too high, just enough to get a wide view, and that's when I heard it. A rustle, then another, then the faintest chirp, and suddenly, Death Valley wasn't quiet anymore. It was buzzing. Desert night creatures were still out, wrapping up their graveyard shifts. Kangaroo rats darted back into burrows. A darkling beetle trundled across the sand, legs moving like tiny pistons. Somewhere nearby, the dry rasp of a lizard belly slid across a rock. Then I saw Eaton Owl, pale and ghost-like, flapping low and silent over the dunes before vanishing behind a ridge. Likely a barn owl, one of the many nocturnal hunters that make the desert their buffet after dark. They're nearly silent flyers, thanks to specialized feathers that muffle wind resistance. Total legends. It landed on a distant perch and watched me for a while, head tilting in that spooky bird way that makes you feel like you're being judged by a very wise librarian. I sat in the sand, cross-legged, just watching the last of the night animals do their thing. And then I noticed something that stopped me cold. Tracks. Tiny, clawed footprints looping around in frantic circles. Some of them ended abruptly, as if the creature had been scooped up. A few yards further on, more tracks, larger this time, imprinted like punctuation marks in the sand. Predator, prey, a moment frozen in time. That's what the desert is good at, keeping secrets, and then sharing them with anyone quiet enough to notice. I followed the tracks for a few minutes and found what looked like the end of the scene. The faint imprint of wings and a small pile of disturbed sand. No blood, no feathers, just a story half told. Desert crime scene, I mumbled to myself, pulling out my camera. I snapped a photo, not for the vlog, not for likes or clicks, but for me, because there's something sacred about that, witnessing a moment that no one else saw. Something wild, unfiltered, real. As the sun climbed higher, the noise shifted again. The day creatures were waking up. Flies, bees, the occasional ground squirrel peeking out to see if breakfast was worth the risk. The rustle of wings in a creosote bush revealed a roadrunner, not quite as cartoonish as the ones on TV, but every bit as twitchy. It hopped down the slope and froze mid-step, eyeing me with suspicion before sprinting off like a caffeinated velociraptor. And then I heard the soft hiss of something ... slithering. I turned. About 15 feet away, a small sidewinder rattlesnake glided effortlessly across the sand, its body forming hypnotic S-shaped loops as it sidewound up a dune. Beautiful, lethal, completely uninterested in me. Sidewinders are perfectly adapted to desert life. They move sideways to reduce contact with the scorching sand and can burrow into it to escape daytime heat. Some people fear them, but the truth is they're shy. They want to be left alone, just like I did yesterday when the buzzard judged my granola bar. I stood still until it passed out of sight, my heart racing more from awe than fear. And as I looked around, it hit me just how alive the desert becomes once the heat backs off. It's like watching a secret society hold its closing ceremony before the sun returns with its daily eviction notice. I lingered another 15 minutes, letting the warmth creep back in, feeling the temperature rise by the minute. The sand under my hands turned from cozy to sharp. The breeze stopped. The air thickened. It was time to go. Back at the car. I brushed the sand from my clothes and checked the dashboard again. 97 degrees Fahrenheit. It was 6:43 a.m. by noon. This place would be uninhabitable again. But right now, it was sacred, silent, stirring. Pulled out my journal, somehow still intact, and jotted down. Desert morning, snake tracks, owl eyes, life before the burn. Wish I could stay longer. Glad I didn't. I smiled to myself, capped the pen, and tossed the journal on the passenger seat. And as I started the car and rolled away from the dunes, I took one last look in the mirror. Just behind me, a jackrabbit bounded into view and disappeared into the brush like a tiny magician. Goodbye. Desert nightlife. Hello. Survival mode again. As the sun climbed over the eastern ridge like a smug fireball returning to its throne, the temperature began its daily sprint upward. By 7:15 a.m., the outside air had already hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, no snooze button. No ease into the morning. Routine. Just heat. Now, I'd officially made it through the night. But this next part, this was the final stretch of the gauntlet. The part where you realize you've somehow survived long enough to care about historical footnotes again. So naturally, I started thinking about the world record. Death Valley holds the hottest air temperature ever recorded on Earth. 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Logged at Furnace Creek on July 10, 1913. That number sits in every textbook, every museum placard, every ranger talk. It's the headline of the entire valley. But here's the thing. They say it's controversial. There's an entire academic debate about whether that 134 degrees Fahrenheit reading was accurate. Some meteorologists argue the instruments used back then weren't reliable. Others claim the observer that day Oscar Denton, a ranch hand turned weatherman, recorded a freak reading caused by a sandstorm and reflected heat. And a few even suggest he might have just made a mistake. To this day, scientists bicker about it on weather forums and in published papers with titles like Revisiting the 1913 Death Valley Temperature Record, a reassessment of the data and observational context. You know, the kind of bedtime reading that gets meteorologists invited to all the parties. The World Meteorological Organization still recognizes the 134 degrees Fahrenheit record, officially, but in 2020 and 2021, Furnace Creek hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit modern, digitally verified, and real enough to melt your optimism before lunch. If those readings keep up, that record may not stay controversial for long. I thought about all of this while sipping my last, almost warm bottle of water and trying not to feel smug that I'd just lived through one of the valley's average summer days. Not a record breaker, not a history maker, just an ordinary slice of extraordinary. And yet, it didn't feel ordinary at all. The sheer idea that this land holds a record so infamous, so debated, makes every gust of hot wind feel personal, like the sun is still trying to prove something. I pulled over near a tiny marker just off the main road. It wasn't on any map, just a squat post with peeling paint and a rusted thermometer nailed to the top. It read 112 degrees Fahrenheit. At 7:38 in the morning, I stepped out of the car and stood beside it, watching as heat shimmered off the road like some invisible ocean. The landscape around me was still and golden, not dead, just dormant, like it was waiting for something to break the silence. And then I heard it, a soft, dry rumble. For a moment I panicked. Earthquake, flash flood, sun collapsing into a vengeful black hole. Nope, just a long freight train of wind rolling over the hills, kicking up sand like confetti at the end of a really weird party. It passed through me in a wave. Yes, but textured. It tasted like crushed rock and dry sage. And it whispered secrets, the kind that only places like this can tell you. Secrets like, nothing out here survives by accident. Every footprint is a gamble. You are not important, but you are welcome if you listen. I stood there, sweat gluing my shirt to my spine, watching the wind twist little cyclones of sand off the ridges. And I realized something else. We don't come to Death Valley just for the beauty. We come for the perspective, because there's something about a place that once clocked 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Number humans were never meant to endure that. Forces you to think about your limits, and how far you're willing to push them. Back in the car, I started writing again in my sun-warped journal. People argue about that 134 degrees Fahrenheit, like it's a trophy or a ghost. But the truth is, even 120 feels like a test. Maybe it doesn't matter what the number is. Maybe the story is more important than the statistic. I capped the pen with my teeth too tired to use my hands and tossed it onto the dashboard. Then, in a moment of ridiculous impulse, I stepped out of the car again, ripped the thermometer off the rusted post, held it up like a trophy, and shouted, 134 or bust. The desert didn't respond, just a dry whisper of wind that carried my words nowhere. Still, I felt better, like I'd played my part in the long, strange story of this place. A single, overheated voice in a century-long debate about numbers that may or may not matter. The sun was higher now. The rocks around me began to glow. My body reminded me I hadn't eaten in hours. My stomach growled loud enough that I half expected a nearby jackrabbit to hiss in offense. But the day wasn't done. Yet not until I escaped. Not until I earned that final exhale. Not until I left Death Valley behind and took a little piece of it with me. After yelling at a thermometer like a sweaty gladiator, I figured it was time to cool the drama and get moving. The heat was climbing identically. I could feel it seeping through the car's glass, warming everything from my backpack straps to the protein bar that now resembled a chocolate crime scene. But before I left the valley, I wanted to visit one last place. A place I'd read about before I ever set foot here. A place older than anything else I'd encountered this trip. Timbisha, Shoshone land. Long before Furnace Creek was Furnace Creek. Before prospectors showed up with picks and terrible judgment. This land belonged to the Timbisha Shoshone people. They didn't just survive here, they thrived. Lived with the heat. Knew it. Understood its rhythms. I drove slowly through the reservation area, just outside the National Park's visitor center, where a small community still lives today. They'd been here for over 1,000 years, long before anyone ever dreamed of turning the desert into a tourist destination. I parked, careful not to look like another curious stranger, snapping Instagram shots of someone else's home. That wasn't why I was here. I sat in the car for a moment, looking out at the adobe-style buildings, the tamarisk trees, and the rocky hills behind them. Modest, resilient, real. There was a cultural center nearby, but it was closed summer hours, I assumed, which was understandable. Who wants to explain ancient traditions to melting tourists at 130 degrees Fahrenheit? Instead, I found a shady patch beneath one of the rare mesquite trees and just sat. No camera, no narration, just sat. The wind rustled through the leaves. Birds chattered softly. A dog barked once, then gave up. And for a few minutes, the valley didn't feel like it was trying to kill me anymore. It felt like it was teaching me. I thought about what it would be like to grow up here. Not to visit, not to experience the heat, but to be from this place, to have desert sand in your blood and sun in your bones. The Timbisha Shoshone people developed incredible strategies to survive, and not just physically. They knew where the springs were, how to gather desert plants, when to hunt and when to wait. They built stone structures that blended into the land and used red ochre in ceremonies long before SPF was a thing. Even their name for this land is different. To the Timbisha Shoshone, Death Valley isn't death anything. It's Tumpesa rock paint named for the red pigment found in the hills. A place of color, of memory, of meaning. Calling it Death Valley says more about the people who named it than the land itself. Back in the 1800s, pioneers and gold-hungry travelers got stranded out here with no knowledge, no respect for the terrain. They died, or nearly did, and one of them, according to legend, looked back on the land and said, "Goodbye, Death Valley." It stuck. But the people who truly understood this land never saw it that way. To them, it was life. A harsh life, sure, but a life earned, not borrowed. I leaned back against the tree and let that truth settle over me like shade. My sunburned skin itched. My cracked lips stung. But inside, something had shifted. Maybe surviving a day in the hottest place on earth wasn't about ego. Maybe it wasn't about checking off a bucket list item or bragging rights. Maybe it was about seeing what happens when you stop fighting the elements and start learning from them. There was a small stone on the ground beside me, worn smooth from years of wind and heat. I picked it up, held it, It wasn't special, just a rock. But it had been here. It had watched everything. It had listened. I tucked it into my pack. My only souvenir. On the way back to the car, I noticed a small mural painted on the side of one of the buildings. It showed a woman gathering mesquite pods, a child carrying a basket, a man tracking something across the dunes. Beneath it, in bold letters, "We are still here." That hit me harder than any sandstorm. Because in a place where even plastic melts, the idea of still being here, of enduring, isn't just impressive, it's defiant. I got back into my car and sat with the engine off, soaking in the silence. I felt different than I had at the start of the day. Not tougher, not smarter, just ... smaller, in a good way. The desert wasn't something to conquer. It wasn't some beast to tame. It was something to listen to sit with, to respect. And once you do, it starts to speak. As I pulled away from the Shoshone village, I drove in silence. No music, no podcast, just the gentle whine of the tires on sun-baked asphalt, and the occasional whisper of wind slipping in through the cracked window. The sun was higher, now high enough that you could feel it crawling down your arms again, like some invisible predator returning to finish the job. Still, after the night and the quiet of the morning, it didn't feel hostile. Not yet. It felt like a reminder. You've got a few hours left. Use them well. I had one last thing I wanted to do. Something practical, something scientific. So I pulled over beneath a warped, sun-bleached sign that read, "Visitors must carry at least 1 gallon of water per person per day." I had about half a bottle left. I stared at it. Then I decided to test everything I'd learned about how humans regulate heat and all the weird, quirky science behind it. I took off my sun hat, wrapped a damp bandana around my head, and stood outside the car, arms wide, like I was about to fight the heat to a draw. Let's talk thermoregulation, shall we? Our bodies cool off primarily by sweating. The sweat evaporates from your skin, which carries heat away and helps keep your core temperature manageable. But in Death Valley, where humidity is almost zero, the sweat evaporates so fast you barely notice it. You think, hey, I'm not sweating. But really, your body is draining like a leaky faucet, and you don't even feel wet. That's the danger. That's why people collapse out here. And it's why I was standing like a T-pose tutorial in the sun, watching beads of moisture vanish from my arms in real time. It was equal parts fascinating and terrifying. Now, you may have heard that drinking cactus water can save you in the desert. Don't fall for it. Most cacti contain alkaloids, compounds that can make you hallucinate, vomit, or dehydrate faster. Some species, like the saguaro or prickly pear, have usable pulp in emergencies. But Death Valley doesn't exactly have hydration stations disguised as succulents. You're more likely to meet a rattlesnake than find a cactus with a sports drink core. Speaking of snakes, I glanced around nervously as I sat back down in the shade of the car. No sign of slithering friends this time. Just a few hardy insects doing whatever bugs do in the early morning before the sand gets too hot to touch. I pulled out my phone, not because it worked still dead, but because I had an offline PDF saved from an old wilderness first aid course. Flipping through it with sticky fingers, I found a section on heat exhaustion. Symptoms include dizziness, nausea, headache, rapid pulse, and heavy sweating. Can escalate into heat stroke, where sweating stops, confusion sets in, and body temperature exceeds 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That last part stuck with me. Sweating stops. That's when you know the body has crossed some invisible threshold into nope territory. And yet here I was, exhausted. Yes, but still sweating, still sipping water in tiny increments. Still alert, enough to remember that one quirky survival tip from a YouTube rabbit hole: press your pulse points with cold water to cool faster, inside your wrists, neck, even behind the knees. I tried it with what was left in the bottle. It helped a little. I also remembered reading that some animals here, like the desert woodrat, build elaborate burrow systems to avoid the heat entirely. They'll line their nests with plant materials that collect condensation overnight. Literal nocturnal engineers. Meanwhile, I was out here with duct tape and chewing gum, pretending I had a plan. Eventually, I got back into the car, turned on the ignition, and let the fan run on low. No AC yet. I didn't want to shock the engine, or my body. I stared out across the road at a distant hill, a soft beige curve under a no-clear blue sky. And I thought about how much we don't understand about survival until we're face to face with the elements. Out here, there's no hold on. Let me Google that. You either know, or you guess. And if you guess wrong, you bake. There's something primal about that. Something cleansing. You sweat out the noise, the distractions, the tiny daily dramas. That feels so important when you're staring at a glowing screen in a temperature-controlled room. Out here, your biggest concern isn't your inbox. It's you, your breath, your hydration, your ability to think clearly, and yeah, your electrolytes. Pro tip: salt matters. I remembered, too late, that sweating without replacing sodium can lead to muscle cramps and confusion. I popped the last of a travel-size electrolyte tab into my mouth and chewed it dry, because I was out of water. It tasted like sour salt and lemon regret, but at least it was something. I sat there, watching the shadow of the car get shorter, tighter, more intense. By noon, it would be a puddle of ink under a car made of regret. But it wasn't noon yet. It was just a man in a metal box, halfway between exhausted and enlightened, chewing a salt tablet and listening to the sound of a hot breeze rolling across an endless stretch of land that didn't care who he was. And I loved it. Not in a let's do this every weekend kind of way, but in the way you love something that pushes you hard and shows you where your edges are. This desert, it had shown me mine. At 8:02 a.m., I crossed a faded line on the pavement, one of those official park boundary signs that looks like it was designed on Microsoft Word in 1997, leaving Death Valley National Park. Come again soon, I laughed. Yeah, maybe in winter, I said to absolutely no one. The road ahead stretched flat and long, flanked by pale hills and tumbleweeds that hadn't tumbled in years. The sun was full strength now, but I'd outpaced its worst hours. The car was holding steady. The air smelled like rubber and dust, but I didn't care. I was getting out. The valley receded in my rearview mirror, shimmering with the illusion of stillness. I could almost pretend it hadn't tried to break me, but I remembered the boiling salt flats, the phantom lake that danced just out of reach, the buzzard that judged me, the coyote that didn't, and the ghost town that whispered old minor curses into the wind. I remembered the hallucinated camel dot and the solar sandwich. I remembered the beetles, the footprints, the owl. I remembered the Timbisha Shoshone mural, "We are still here." And I realized so was I. Somehow, through duct-taped sunshields, melted protein bars, a rogue spider encounter, and one long night of gravel-bed soul-searching, I had made it. I pulled over one last time just outside the park limits on small gravel shoulder with a half-crushed trash can and a scenic overlook that mostly just showed you more dust. I got out of the car and stood there, squinting into the rising haze. A breeze nudged my hair. It was warm, but not hot, not angry. It was almost friendly. And in that breeze, I let my breath slow down. For the first time in over 24 hours, I wasn't in survival mode. I was in reflection mode. I thought about what I'd take with me from all this. Besides sunburn and a need for several gallons of electrolyte-infused therapy, I'd take the silence. That deep, vibrating silence of the desert at night. The kind that isn't empty, it's full of stories, and sand, and time. The kind that wraps around your brain and gently mutes everything else. I'd take the clarity dot, that sudden sense of what matters when the heat forces you to strip away everything extra. No signal doesn't matter, no plans, even better. Just breath, and grit, and one foot in front of the other. And I'd take the humor, because honestly, if you can't laugh at yourself for melting a granola bar into a spoonful of sadness, or yelling, "I am the thermometer now," to an empty valley, what are we even doing here? I climbed back into the car and sat with the engine running, AC gently humming, watching the sky shift from soft blue to blazing white. The road called, but before I left, I picked up my battered journal, flipped to the last blank page, and wrote, "Death Valley didn't kill me. It educated me. It sweated the nonsense out of me. It reminded me that survival isn't about strength, it's about stillness, awareness, and having just enough duct tape to get you to sunrise." Then I drew a tiny camel next to it. I rolled down the window one last time, not for cooling, not for drama, just to let the desert air in. It smelled like baked minerals, sun-soaked sand, and my own slow-cooked evolution. I whispered, "Thanks," and hit the road. The valley stayed behind me, but a part of me stayed in the valley. The heat, the silence, the shimmer, and the story. Because everyone needs at least one day where they almost become a very slow, slightly sarcastic desert ghost. So now, as you lie back, lights off, and the hum of your own room surrounds you, safe, quiet. Cool. Let the heat of the desert drift away like a passing wind. Maybe your feet aren't blistered. Maybe you didn't hallucinate a camel. Maybe your water bottle isn't a boiling science experiment. But maybe, just maybe, some part of you felt the sun pressing against your thoughts tonight. Felt the slow rhythm of rocks releasing their secrets under the stars. That's the magic of a place like Death Valley. It's not just about survival. It's about seeing differently. About realizing that silence is not emptiness, and that stillness isn't failure, it's presence. In a world that shouts and scrolls and constantly distracts, the desert whispers, it waits. And if you sit long enough, it teaches you something true. You don't have to run from the heat. You don't have to fight the wild. Sometimes you just need to listen. And tomorrow, when your day begins, maybe you'll move a little slower, breathe a little deeper, smile at the warmth on your face, because you'll remember the sound of your heart pounding in the sun, and the breeze brushing over fossil tracks, and a fox's eyes blinking once before vanishing into the dark. Sleep easy tonight. You survived the hottest place on earth, and you came back cooler. Good night, everyone.